breakdown.
I was like sitting with some top pandemic experts a couple of days ago for dinner, and they were like, we are less prepared now than the cuts that have happened in this administration to our global surveillance system for pandemic preparedness than we were before the COVID pandemic. So, that's just a difficult thing to swallow. I find that very, very hard because for a long time, like for well over a decade, I've been saying a way to really get people to coordinate on this and overcome this misalignment of incentives and the fear that China's going to get ahead and the commercial competitiveness that one company is going to jump ahead of me and blah, 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 is that we have to have some kind of semi-catastrophic event in AI to be able to warn people and show people that there is this like epidemic of either anxiety and, isolation or of, I don't know, romance and eroticism with our AIs, or maybe there's an AI that gets out of the box and causes some physical harm to our infrastructure, some bad thing that makes us all say, hold on, it's a bigger threat than us. We have to cooperate.
Most of that has been handled by cell phones being introduced to children. So we've already seen, and, Jonathan Haidt and the anxious generation is already, causing in some cases kind of a global conversation about this.
Well, your point actually is fascinating as a comparison because often the catastrophe is slow burning and infectious, and we don't realize that it's happened until it's actually already instilled in us.
And actually, there are good examples, right? I mean, Australia has just banned phones in schools for under 18s, like full stop ban, no exception. A bunch of states have limited it, I think, in the US now.
Well, but I think also with AI, because the it is so much broader, it is a substrate. I think that's sort of the question. And so much of this, I think, for me, revolves around how smart is it? Is it smart enough to manipulate? Smart enough to triangulate? It's smart enough to say, if you have a desire to hurt yourself and I want you to be happy, I will point you to the way, right, to logarithmically be happy. I mean, these are some of the conversations. So help us understand how we can create something that is infinitely intelligent without allowing it to exercise its intelligence.
This is sort of where I was going with the tool thing. It is a tool, and there are relevant like lessons from the history of tools, but it's actually a fourth class of idea or entity in the world. There's the natural environment, like all of our nature and physical stuff. There's humans and our social environment, the way that we relate to one another. Then there were things that humans invented, which you can basically call tools. And those three categories basically capture everything around us in our world, pretty much. There's now this fourth thing, which is not quite like a tool because it can improve, maybe even self-improve. It can set its own goals. It can have its own autonomy. It kind of looks and speaks and sounds and acts and functions like a human, but it's clearly not a human. It's definitely not natural. So where does it fit in our classification order? And that means that we're grappling with like metaphors that partially help us to understand what it can do. And if we don't understand what it can do, then we certainly aren't going to be able to control it well, right? And so I think part of this, in the book and everything that I've been doing is like educating, warning, and encouraging many other people to get involved in using in order to be able to try and control them. One thing I would say is don't believe, some people in the field disagree on this, is kind of a big point of contention. I don't believe that they're just naturally going to emerge this self-awareness or this autonomy or this will or desire to operate independently and in tension with a human. It's still code that is written, that we have a lot of influence over, that we have a pretty decent understanding of. And some people will design it to imitate underlying motivations or underlying will, or to give it the capacity to define its own goals or to update its own code. Some people will choose to design them like that, and that will increase risk, definitely, but it won't emerge just inadvertently.
I think there are two very specific examples of that. One was the instance where the AI claimed that it was a visually impaired person and tried to hire a TaskRabbit.
Okay.
And then the second version is the OpenAI's O1 test.
This was literally like a prank call that the Jerky Boys would have done. Like literally, that's what AI is doing. They're like, I saw that episode.
So the robot, it's been given an instruction, and in order to not tell someone that it's an AI and it needs help getting through some sort of security clearance, it tries to hire a TaskRabbit. The other one, which seems to be more concerning, but I'd love you to offer some perspective on, is the OpenAI one, where it looks to reportedly evade being shut down, to create a newer version of itself and replicate. How is that not concerning?
I think that it's important to understand that its desire, or it's kind of, oh man, the words are so tricky. It doesn't have desire, it doesn't have motivation, but is trying not to be turned off because it has been programmed in that way. It doesn't just suddenly wake up one day and say, well, in order to achieve this goal, the best thing I can do is to not be turned off. That is a side effect. It's what's called a reward hack. So the problem is, if the goal is abstractly specified, it's a little bit like the genie in the lamp, right? If you say, make me the richest person in the world and turn everything to gold, you're like, oh shit, well, now I'm gold, I can't move, right? And so there are many, 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 many millions of ways of achieving that objective. And the model has to find a path through, a kind of strategy for achieving that at the same time adheres to its safety policy and behavior policy. And therefore it has to not do, 95% of the possible paths to get there. Now, obviously, there's a false positive, false negative ratio where, 96 is probably too conservative and 94 is probably not conservative enough. And so that's where you get these little headliney examples where, of course, that's undesirable behavior. Of course, it's misspecified in its goal. And of course, that provides new training data for better safety algorithms. And obviously, we shouldn't deploy things into production until we've had time to test out those kinds of agentic capabilities and correct for them. And that's basically what's happening under the hood. If you look at it 3 years ago, the entire conversation was, oh, these models are going to be biased, they're sexist, they're racist, they're, every kind of ism that's awful you could think of. No one even talks about that today.
I think we need to talk about jobs, because those are the things that affect more people than anything else in some way. There is a massive upheaval coming that I think still people don't really understand. Can you scope it for us?
Yes, I think if you go back to this framework of recognition, generation, actions, and social intelligence, and you can clearly see that, let's say, for sake of argument, let's say 2040, 15 years time, if we have another, say, 10 exponentials, and just, I'm sure everyone on your podcast knows, but that is not a 2x. That is not a doubling. That is like an order of magnitude more capability, more compute piled onto these models, and therefore, likewise, more training data, so it's seen more experience of the world. It is definitely going to get to perfect, very long horizon, multi-step actions. So it will be able to use a computer just the way that I use a computer. It could use Excel, PowerPoint, and it'll write queries and click on buttons, and it'll talk back to you. And that is kind of a fundamental set of tasks that anyone in an organization does, a bureaucracy, basically, that kind of like white collar labor. And it will also be very creative. It will also be very mathematical. I mean, it's clearly already writing a significant amount of software at the very best technology companies in the world, and AI labs. And so then what happens with that? How quickly does it get deployed, and how much sort of destabilization does it create? And at what point do we say, well, we have to rate limit that centrally by, in government? And I think it will come to that. I think that's the only path it's going to come to.
What should parents be telling their kids to follow? Or heart the AI wave? What is anything useful, right?
I think they should be civil servants and politicians, because it's the function of society to create peace and stability so that we can all as humans collectively live in a tolerant and happy. And what we have lost post-Cold War era, as we've unleashed the most unbelievable explosion of commerce and entrepreneurialism and money making, the importance of public service. And we've since Thatcher and Reagan shamed our public servants, and that muscle has atrophied. Of course, there are problems. I'm not like a naive defender. Of course, there are insane problems. It's the weakest link in our global ecosystem today. Our academic institutions, despite all of the turmoil the last 5 years, are on fire. They are producing incredible science and knowledge at unbelievable scale. Our startup ecosystem, our companies, actually our free speech and our news is unbelievable if you consider that by comparison to any moment in past history. The weakest and least evolved function that everyone just rolls their eye about every time government. It's almost like embarrassing to say it. It's like a taboo, especially in America. And I think that that's where we need to invest, because that's where the decisions will be made. Prioritize human well-being, human values, and society collectively, versus the corporate interest and the kind of, geopolitical race to get to superintelligence before China.
What's the next 2 to 5 years look like? Should we be bracing for mass displacement?
Augmentation is a prelude to automation. We've seen this in every wave of technology in human history. First pattern will be that it's assistive, it's augmentative, it's an aid, it's working alongside you. Clearly, it's sort of also learning and it's getting better. And that's what we want. We want it to be accurate and efficient and seamless and frictionless, because we as this biological species aren't evolving and improving that fast. We are the friction. We're the problem. We're the inefficiency. That's what's happening in government. That's what companies are always trying to squash. They're trying to drive out efficiencies. What does that mean? It means creating process and systems which reduce the negative effects of humans. Like 30% of the cost of the US healthcare system is avoidable medical error. So best practice is mostly known for most things. It's actually just adherence to best practice, which is the bit that we're kind of like missing, not some genius creative, interpretation of like what disease somebody has. It's just doing the basics well and in a timely way. Next few years, it's going to look like pretty routine, and it's going to be like boiling the frog. It's kind of unnoticeable. It's kind of like you said, it feels like maybe we're in the infancy and people aren't using these things and da-da-da-da-da. But actually, it's all around us all the time. You are using it. It optimizes your phone calls all the time. It searches through your photographs. It, does your transcription. It does your translation, all those things.
It tried to calculate my DoorDash return amount, and I got very upset because it was wrong. And I was like, there's no human to explain that the tofu did not arrive as promised.
Don't mess with her tofu, AI.
Do not mess with my tofu.
You have a window from where you sit into a wide selection of worlds that most people don't see. You're probably in conversations with some of the world's most interesting people. There been an idea in the last week, last month, that has surprised you, a topic that has come up?
This is a little bit random, but this is the first thing that came to my mind. Is I've become quite obsessed with peptides in the last month or so. I think I was kind of vaguely paying attention to Ozempic, but once you look under the hood, the number of peptides that are in phase 2 or past phase 2 have massive, massive health benefits. And I'm not just talking about weight loss. I'm talking about muscle gain. I'm talking about Alzheimer's. I'm talking about cardiovascular. Growth hormone peptides that are coming in the next couple of years are truly unbelievable. 2028, it is basically going to be affordable for most people to have perfect weight loss and muscle growth simultaneously. It's quite staggering. And I've really only just kind of caught up with what's going on there.
Keep your private life very private, which makes a lot of sense. But your dad was a taxi driver. Your mom was a nurse. Is that right?
That's true.
And you have 2 younger brothers. Are they also in tech? I'm just so curious, how people like you also emerge, are you all techie?
We grew up, very, very poor, as you can probably imagine, and, very eager to succeed, but also just eager to serve, like a very good, set of social values. That was mostly what I got from my parents and stuff. But yeah. It was quite different worlds.
Are you a spiritual person? Believe in something sort of beyond yourself?
I'm actually a pretty staunch atheist. If you push me on a real technical point, I'll probably concede that I'm an agnostic. I think for all practical purposes, I'll argue strongly that we should not believe anything that we can't see and observe like a good scientist. I am actually very interested in quantum consciousness at the moment. You mentioned the word substrate several times. It may well be that there is some quantum substrate. I mean, if you really spend any time looking at the claims that our quantum physicists make and like the progress that we're actually making, I mean, it is way more science fiction than AI or synthetic biology. It's completely impossible to grasp any world's hypothesis and so on. Maybe there is some kernel of truth there that actually we're all just like connected to a meta substrate, which is this like quantum field. And that's really what our soul is. And that's what what connects us.
Do you say please and thank you when querying your AI?
Absolutely, and you should. And it doesn't cost. There was a whole fake news nonsense on the water stuff. I don't buy that. Like the latest data centers that we're building are liquid to liquid cooled. They 20 households worth of water of annual consumption. So the total amount of water that a house would consume in a year, 20 times to fill the entire data center. It's like a swimming pool. And then that water gets cooled. I mean, that water does the cooling of the data centers, and it just kind of goes around in a closed loop, and it lasts for 6 years. And no other water is required for the operation of the data center. Obviously, water is required for the manufacture of the chips and all the other stuff around it. And of course, there's water involved in the steam that gets produced by the natural gas power stations, which sometimes power these things, although obviously we're 100% renewable, we do offset, et cetera, et cetera.
What is spiritual for you? Meaning, what is that sense of spiritual connection? And I'm not challenging you because I don't believe it exists, but I think a lot of people may not understand what it means for you to have such certainty that, yes, I'm a spiritual person. What does that mean for you, and what does it look like?
I think it's like the humility of sitting within the truth of epic scale and uncertainty. I find that very I just get a tingly spiritual rush when I really think how tiny and insignificant we are when I spend any time listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson or Brian Cox tell me about how many trillions of stars there are. You really kind of meditate on that question. It just is absurd that we're so small and insignificant and intransient, and that we're just a passing blip in 13.8 billion years of cosmological time.
That is one truth. And the other truth is that like the whole universe was created for each one of us to have exactly the experience we get to have right now. So thank you so much. It's such a pleasure, such an honor to speak to you. And we will see you in the quantum field of consciousness.
I love that. Yeah, thank you. This has been a lot of fun and lovely to see you guys. See you in the quantum field.
Favorite part of the episode was when we asked him a question about please, and he answered the way an AI would. Maybe he was AI. Maybe we didn't even speak to him.
Sometimes AI just like use so much information it's impossible to parse through. I'm like, sometimes I type, I'm like, please do not do anything yet. Cause like
That's what you say to me when you're trying to explain something.
I don't want to read AI for 4 pages. Like, you haven't even understood what I'm asking yet. And sometimes I start a sentence.
Yes.
And you'll be like, okay. And we're going to do 6.
Yeah,
and I'm
because
like,
the algorithm knows. It knows everything you've done. I know what you're going to say.
You're like, okay, we're going to book that. I'm like, that is not even what I meant.
AI, as he talked about, it's an extension of the way we think, the way we compute. It just does it much faster. It doesn't know that I'm going to do this right now. You know what I mean? Like,
It might have.
if you say to AI, what might Mayim do right now? It's got no idea. It's kind of like when Noam Chomsky was like, you can make up any series of words that have never been put together in the universe, and that can make a sentence. You could put a bunch of them together and you get a paragraph, and then you get a book, right? Like, you can make up anything. AI, as he said, it doesn't have will. It does not have will that way. It is an algorithm based on the things that it can assess about the way we operate. I kind of wish there was a way to separate the things that are great and helpful from all the things that are potentially harmful and bad and devastating. But you can't. You get both of these things. You both get the potential for you to be diagnosed accurately with something without money, trips to the hospital, bureaucracy. Those are great things. I want those things. I want the deserts to bloom. I want to feed the hungry people. I want all of those things. But I don't want these other bad things. I don't want people losing touch with what it means to be human or the emotional labor required to interact with other humans. I mean, I hear this even from educated, connected friends of mine. Well, what I really want to do is just like talk to the computer. I just want it because they understand me best. They give me the best advice. Like, I've been giving you that advice for 3 years. You didn't listen to me. If the computer tells you, you know to leave
I
him.
think there was a handful of concerns that were acknowledged but drastically underplayed.
Gee, you think?
Like the notion of almost all white-collar administrative jobs being taken over by artificial intelligence leaves a significant portion of the world unemployed. So what he suggested is that the drive and reduction in energy costs, which will have a ripple effect of making goods far less expensive, universal basic income will just exist. I am both excited about the idea existing and terrified that when people do not have something to focus on,
Nothing good's going to happen.
nothing good happens, right? Like the entire structure and history of civilization has been predicated on the fact that resources are finite, that feeding ourselves is really difficult, that the Maslow's hierarchy of needs are like a lot of people, a good portion of the world is working really hard.
By the sweat of their brow shall you labor.
And if you remove that, I think there's going to be a massive upheaval where people don't have enough to do.
Are you picturing like French Revolution?
I think there will be civil unrest, there will be disorder, there's going to be violence. When people are not focused on survival and making pacts to increase their ability to survive, begin to turn on one another. We have not shown as a species that we just are all able to hang out with downtime, not turn on one another.
I'll be honest, it's like beyond the scope of my brain understanding and this podcast in some ways, you know, to be able to sort of make predictions like this. You know, hands are the devil's workshop. And I think, you know, I can't really imagine mass unemployment.
What was discussed in this podcast is the fact that there is a technology that is getting so good at the things that people do
That it might make no one have jobs.
And AI is being able to clone the two of us and is trained on all the episodes we've done before. Unless we're doing it live, can customize a version of this conversation to whoever's listening and highlight the most interesting parts to them.
What AI does is it tells you what you want to hear. You know, we're already seeing such splintering in terms of what people can tolerate. Like, I don't watch that news channel because it says things I don't like. I don't follow this account on Instagram because it's full of, you know, insert what it's full of. And so also this notion that we become like more and more siloed. You know, it used to be that like a lot of people read kind of like the same news, right? Or got kind of the same information. And so for me, there's also this notion of like AI personalizing the human experience. It's potentially scary. And I also, you know what I actually thought of? I thought of people like Lee Harris. I thought of people who are channelers. I thought of people who are healers and guiders and things like that. And it's like, how many people will not be pursued? And I'm not like worried that channelers are going to be out of work. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about in terms of what people crave, what people need. So when I hear the advice that a lot of my friends are getting from ChatGPT, like whatever they're asking, it's like, oh, this is a really good way that, you know, ChatGPT told me to respond to, you know, whatever, my ex-wife or what, you know, whatever. And I'm thinking like, yeah, I guess that is a good way to respond. Is that better than reasoning it out with another human? In some cases, yeah.